Hi, I'm Inara Vexley, and on the night of my 30th birthday, my mother served me soup, just for me, filled with wild mushrooms she picked herself. She smiled while she watched me lift the spoon. My sister laughed, the whole table was clinking glasses. And then, under the table, my grandmother slipped me a note. Pretend to be sick. Leave the table now. Everyone thought I was the unstable one, the emotional one, the girl who always made things dramatic. But what if the truth wasn't that I overreacted? What if the truth was sitting right there in that bowl? Would you take the bite? Or would you finally ask, what kind of mother does that to her daughter, on her birthday? I still remember how the air smelled when I walked into my mother's backyard that evening, like dry pine mixed with candle wax. Early October in Boulder had that strange, in-between chill, where the sunset made everything glow, but the breeze made you pull your sweater closer. The patio was lined with twinkle lights and mismatched chairs, and there were about 30 people standing around, laughing, holding wine glasses. My name was printed on a banner strung across the fence, but the color scheme, the flowers, the music, it was all Celine. I didn't even like pale pink roses, but they were everywhere. It was supposed to be my 30th birthday, yet somehow the whole place looked like a set for one of her Instagram shoots. I paused at the edge of the deck, watching Celine in the center of the crowd. She was draped in a satin jumpsuit, a phone in one hand and a champagne flute in the other, hair catching the light like she'd planned the timing. She wasn't even living in Colorado anymore. She'd flown in from Los Angeles for my big day, but everyone seemed to be here for her. People I hadn't seen in years kept greeting her like she was the guest of honor. My grandmother, Morwen, sat off to the side at one of the tables, her silver hair in a neat bun, eyes moving slowly over everything. When she caught my gaze, she gave me the faintest smile, the kind that says, I see what's happening without a single word. Happy birthday, someone yelled. Before I could even respond, Celine leaned forward and blew out the candle sitting in front of the cake. For fun, a joke she'd made since we were teenagers. People laughed. I managed to clap along, but inside something pressed against my chest. 30 years old, and still the extra seat at my own table. I made my way to the long dining table where the food was set. Ramona Strick, a family friend who'd been at every holiday since I was a child, grabbed my arm. Your mom went all out, sweetie, she said brightly. This looks like something out of a magazine. I glanced at the spread. Salads, roast chicken, a charcuterie board, but one large covered pot sat at the head of the table, separate from everything else. Valora, my mother, emerged from the kitchen then, wearing an apron like she'd been starring in a cooking show. Special dish just for you, Inara, she called out. You're going to love it. I made mushroom soup, your favorite. It wasn't my favorite, not since college, but I didn't correct her. Everyone else got served chicken and potatoes on stoneware plates while she brought me a deep white bowl, steam curling up like smoke. She set it in front of me with both hands, smiling a little too widely. Eat while it's hot, she said softly. Celine leaned over and grinned at me. Guess you're still the baby. Mom's feeding you special. A few people chuckled. I stirred the soup slowly, watching tiny slices of mushroom roll in the broth. My mother's eyes didn't leave me. I felt my stomach tighten. Thanks, Mom, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I could feel Ramona's eyes on me, then darting away. The chatter at the table rose again, Celine telling a story about a brand she was working with, people nodding and asking questions. No one asked me anything. I lifted the spoon but didn't take a bite. Valora's voice floated over the noise. It's rude not to eat something I made just for you. My hands felt damp under the table. I forced a smile. I will, I said. Just letting it cool. Celine chuckled. Don't tell me you're going vegan now. Mom's soup is legendary. Laughter again. Even Ramona let out a small giggle, though it sounded nervous. I excused myself, murmuring something about checking the restroom. The hallway was dim and quiet after the noise outside. In the bathroom, I leaned over the sink and stared at my reflection. My lipstick had worn off. My eyes looked older than 30. Why does this never feel like it's mine? I whispered. Images flickered through my mind. Birthdays where Celine helped by inviting her friends. Cakes my mother cut before I arrived. Gifts picked out on my behalf. It was always about them, never me. I took a few deep breaths, straightened my sweater, and returned to the patio. My bowl of soup sat untouched, still steaming faintly. Conversation swirled around me, but I could barely hear it. My grandmother's eyes followed me as I sat back down. A fly buzzed near the bowl and landed briefly on the edge before darting away. I watched it, my skin prickling. Valora leaned in closer, her perfume sweet and cloying. "Just one bite, sweetheart," she murmured. "For me." Celine smirked, tapping her phone. "Oh, come on, Anna. Mom's not going to poison you." The table erupted in laughter, but the joke landed like a stone in my gut. I forced a small chuckle, my fingers tightening around the spoon. My mother reached out to adjust the spoon in my hand, her nails grazing my skin. Her voice stayed soft, coaxing. "Just one bite. Show me you appreciate the effort." I stared into the bowl. The mushrooms floated like little shadows. My heart thudded against my ribs. For a second, the noise around me faded into a low hum. I didn't know if this was just another performance of control, another way to make me small in front of everyone, or something darker. And then, under the table, I felt something slip into my palm, something cold and folded. The paper was thin and cool against my palm. I kept my fingers curled around it while trying to keep my face steady, nodding along to a story someone was telling about a ski trip. My heart was a drum inside my ribs. I shifted slightly in my chair, sliding the note beneath the edge of the tablecloth, and unfolded it with my thumb. The handwriting was small, deliberate. "Pretend to be sick. Leave the table now." For a moment, I thought I'd read it wrong. The words blurred and then sharpened again. I didn't dare look up right away. Instead, I reached for my water glass, lifting it slowly to my lips. When I finally let my gaze drift across the table, I saw her, Grandma Morwen, still sitting quietly, a wine glass in one hand, her posture straight. She wasn't panicked, her eyes locked on mine like a surgeon holding steady over an incision. No nod, no shake of the head, just calm urgency. The clinking of silverware and bursts of laughter around me felt miles away. The soup sat untouched in front of me, steam now curling in slower ribbons. My mother was leaning toward Ramona, whispering something that made Ramona laugh politely. Celine was already on her phone again, the glow lighting her perfectly contoured face. I thought about slipping the note into my purse, but my hands were trembling too much. I folded it back up, smaller than before, and let it rest in my lap. In that instant, I understood this wasn't one of Grandma's dramatic gestures or subtle jabs at my mother's control. It was a warning, a command. I forced my lips into what I hoped looked like a faint smile and let my hand drift to my forehead. "Are you okay?" Celine asked, but her tone was flat, distracted, as if she was asking out of habit. "I think the wine's a bit strong," I murmured. My voice came out softer than I intended. I stood slowly, pressing one hand to my stomach. "I'm feeling a little dizzy. Just need a minute." Valora's head turned toward me sharply. Her smile froze. There was the slightest tightening around her mouth, a flicker in her eyes. "Honey, sit back down. You've barely eaten," she said sweetly. Celine leaned toward one of our cousins and muttered something. They both laughed. "Always the sensitive stomach," she said under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. I didn't reply. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else as I pushed my chair back. "I'll be fine. Just need the bathroom," I said, directing the words to no one and everyone at once. The night air met me like a splash of water when I stepped inside the hallway, leaving the patio noise behind. The muted sounds of conversation drifted after me as I closed the bathroom door and turned the lock. I sat on the edge of the tub, pulling the note out again. The words were the same. "Pretend to be sick. Leave the table now." I pressed the paper to my chest and tried to breathe. Grandma had always been quiet but watchful. When my mother scolded me for small mistakes, Grandma's eyes would flicker, not in pity, but in calculation. When Celine accidentally broke the necklace Dad had given me years ago, Grandma was the one who quietly handed me a repaired chain weeks later without a word. She never spoke against Valora, but she saw. For the first time, a thought hit me hard. Maybe this family's warmth wasn't warmth at all. Maybe it had always been a facade, a long-running performance where my role was to sit, smile, and swallow whatever was put in front of me. I stood, pacing once across the small tile floor. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, my eyes too wide. I opened the window a crack and let the cool night air in. Outside, I could still hear the rise and fall of voices, the tinkle of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter. It was surreal, like a radio playing in another room while you wait for bad news in a hospital hallway. I read the note again. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Why tonight? Why now? I tried to picture Grandma writing it, slipping it under the table, timing it so no one would see. The thought made my throat tighten. She was trying to protect me. From what? Down the hallway, a faint clatter reached my ears. The sound of a glass tipping, then breaking. My body reacted before my mind did. I stepped toward the door, pressing my ear against it. Voices swelled, then lowered again. "She's always been dramatic," someone said. It sounded like Celine, her tone dripping with contempt. Another sound cut through, chairs scraping suddenly, the abrupt end of laughter. Then a harsh, guttural noise, someone coughing, hard, once, twice. The coughing turned into choking, a sound I recognized from movies but had never heard in real life. I froze, one hand on the doorknob. The smell of soap and perfume in the bathroom suddenly felt too strong. My mind raced. Had Grandma meant the soup? Was it me who was supposed to? My stomach turned. Through the door, another voice rose. Valora's, sharp but trying to stay calm. "Get some water!" A commotion followed. Footsteps. Someone gasping. I looked at the note one more time, the words now seared into my brain. "Leave the table now." My breath came fast. My heart pounded in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, but another part of me, a deeper, steadier part, wanted to open the door and face whatever was happening out there. The laughter had stopped, only muffled coughing and hurried movement now. I placed the note carefully into my pocket, straightened my shoulders, and took a slow, deliberate breath. The cool air from the window brushed the back of my neck as if urging me forward. I reached for the doorknob. I froze by the bathroom door as the sound of coughing turned into gasping. I didn't open the door. Not yet. The gasping sound had stopped as suddenly as it started, replaced by awkward murmurs and someone clinking a spoon against a glass, probably trying to cover the tension with a toast or a bad joke. My hand was still on the doorknob, but I didn't twist it. I couldn't. My instincts screamed not to move, so I leaned in, ear pressed gently against the wood, listening for what might come next. Footsteps, maybe, shouting, but it didn't come. Instead, laughter returned. Forced, a bit higher pitched than before. Like someone trying to reset the atmosphere without actually acknowledging that anything strange had happened. I backed away slowly and sat back down on the closed toilet lid, folding my arms around myself. The silence in the bathroom wrapped around me like a coat that didn't quite fit. And that's when the memories crept in. Not loud or dramatic, just quiet realizations stacked like bricks in the back of my mind. Earlier that evening, Valora had given me a gift. It was handed to me with a showy smile in front of half the guests, wrapped in gold paper with a white ribbon, like she'd plucked it from a Martha Stewart catalog. I'd opened it on command while everyone watched, nodding and smiling because that's what you do when your mother orchestrates a public moment. Inside the box was a photo frame. Heavy, probably expensive. Inside the frame was a photo. Our family, Dad, Mom, Celine, and a few cousins during a beach trip to the Oregon coast. Celine was in the center, arm around Mom. I wasn't in the picture. I remember blinking at it for a second too long, pretending I was admiring the frame. My mother leaned in and said cheerfully, "You must have been the one taking the picture, sweetheart." But I hadn't been. I remembered that day. I wasn't in the photo because Celine had insisted it was just for the girls, and I had been sent to get ice from the car. When I returned, they were already putting the camera away. That was 3 summers ago. I hadn't thought about it in years, had buried the sting like so many others. But now, holding that memory next to the note from Grandma, the soup, the coughing, and Valora's too smooth smile, it all began to form a clearer picture. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't an accident. This had a pattern, and that pattern had a name: erasure. I stood and opened my purse, rummaging for the birthday card someone had slid into it during the party. I didn't remember who had given it to me, possibly Ramona, maybe one of the distant cousins. It was a generic card, the kind you pick up last minute from a drugstore rack, pale blue with a silver foil balloon on the front and the words, "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Inside was a message printed in script, "With love from all of us." No names, no handwriting, just nothing. I held the card up to the light for a second, then slowly sat back down. I thought about every birthday I could remember, every time Valora had somehow made it about someone else. The year I turned 15 and Celine announced she'd been accepted into NYU and everyone raised a toast to her. The year I turned 22 and Mom cried at dinner because she missed her own mother, and suddenly, the night became about honoring Grandma's memory instead of celebrating me. The year I turned 10 and Celine told the table she'd said yes to her first marriage proposal. Always them, always not me. I let out a breath, slow and controlled, and stared at the mirror again. My own face looked unfamiliar in this lighting. Harsher, maybe. More awake. The gift. The card. The soup. Everything had been staged to look normal, generous even. If you didn't look closely, it was easy to miss the signs. But tonight, there was no missing them. There was something deliberate in the way she presented that bowl, in the way she watched me. And Grandma knew. I folded the card gently, corner to corner, and walked to the trash bin near the sink. I didn't crumple it. I placed it in like someone putting away something fragile that no longer worked. No one had texted me. No one had knocked on the door to check if I was okay. The party was continuing outside those walls like I didn't exist. Again. But this time, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't looking for someone to care. I wasn't craving a voice to call out my name. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and stared at the home screen. I didn't unlock it. I didn't need to scroll through unanswered messages or old photos that would only hurt. I just let it rest on my lap, the screen dark and blank, like silence embodied. I waited. Not for someone, not for forgiveness, just for the next moment, the next breath. The ceiling fan hummed above me, slow and steady. The faint music from the backyard shifted into something lighter, a jazz standard maybe, trying to erase what had happened minutes before. A new page for people who refused to read the one before. I leaned back slightly and whispered into the stillness. This time, I saw it coming. And I wasn't the only one who noticed something was off. I kept my back to the bathroom door, palms pressed against the cool counter, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. The faint smell of the mushroom soup still lingered in my nose, even though I'd never eaten it. My eyes darted to the small trash bin where I'd placed the birthday card. It sat there like evidence. I wanted to grab it back, but something inside me told me to leave it there, like a marker of the shift that had begun inside me. Through the door came the sounds of the party in fragments, forks against plates, muted laughter, the occasional cough, but it all felt distant now, like a television on in another room. Then came footsteps. Slow, unhurried, but with a rhythm that told me they weren't headed to the bathroom. They stopped just outside, and I caught voices, low but clear enough to hear if I held my breath. It wouldn't be a party without Inara's little exit routine, a woman said with a chuckle. Aunt Isolde. Her voice was unmistakable, smooth, like she was always auditioning for a stage play. Another voice, a male cousin's, answered, "Yeah, she needs to grow out of that drama phase. Every year, same thing. Some scene." They both laughed softly. I closed my eyes. Even now, even at 30, they were still turning me into the punchline. I wasn't the problem. The problem was the way they'd rewritten every moment to make my reactions the spectacle instead of the cause. But they'd never admit it, not even to themselves. I stayed still, listening. The voices lowered, as if shifting gears. "Do you remember that story about Valora when she was a kid?" the cousin asked. "She almost died eating some wild mushrooms once. Your mom, Morwen, she just knew. Pulled her away at the last second." Aunt Isolde let out a small gasp. "Oh yes, the intuition story. Grandma's famous moment. She's told it at least a dozen times." Said she saved Valora's life. Funny how some people never forget a scare like that, the cousin mused. My breath caught. I had never heard that story before, or if I had, it had been tucked into the background of 1,000 other conversations and glossed over like everything else. My mind started to spin. My mother, saved from poisoned mushrooms by Grandma, and now my mother bringing a special mushroom soup to her daughter's birthday dinner. This wasn't about a recipe. This was about a message. I opened the bathroom door just an inch, enough to let the hallway air slip in, and peeked out. The corridor was dim, lit only by a small sconce. The footsteps had moved on. I could hear Aunt Isolde's voice further down, joining the din of the dining room again. I stepped out slowly, my shoes silent on the wood floor. The sound of clinking glasses floated back to normal. Someone was telling a story. Celine's laugh rose above the rest, bright and practiced. Through the archway, I could see my mother at the table, her posture relaxed, wineglass in hand. She was smiling, laughing even. The same woman who had leaned over me minutes before, urging me to take a bite. Grandma Morwen sat a few seats away, her face composed but not cold. Her eyes met mine across the distance. This time she didn't smile. She gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. The shift inside me felt like a click. I stayed hidden behind the archway, watching. My mother's hand gestured as she talked, her bracelet catching the light. Celine whispered something to a guest, and they both snickered. Aunt Isolde refilled her glass. Everything looked normal, ordinary, but I knew it wasn't. Why would a woman once saved from poisoned mushrooms serve them to her own daughter? Unless this was about control, about making a point, about seeing whether I'd still obey, still play the role. The soup wasn't a meal. It was a test. I thought about the photo frame, the unsigned card, the note in my pocket, all small acts, but when you lined them up, they formed a pattern like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to this moment. A wave of something that wasn't quite rage and wasn't quite grief rolled through me. It was quieter than either of those. Controlled. Focused. For years I'd believed my silence kept the peace. But maybe my silence was exactly what allowed this theater to keep running. I stepped closer to the archway, staying in the shadows. I wanted to see their faces, hear their words, understand the shape of what I was up against. My mother tipped her head back, laughing at something Celine had said. Her lipstick was perfect, her nails gleamed. She looked like the picture of hospitality. Grandma set down her wine glass with a soft click. She didn't look at anyone else. She looked only at me. The nod she gave was sharper this time, like a cue on a stage. I felt my spine straighten, a strange calm settling over me. They thought they knew me. They thought they knew how I'd behave. But I was no longer the little girl taking ice from the car while the photo was snapped without me. The party continued. Glasses were refilled. Someone clapped at the end of a story. It all looked the same as it had an hour ago, but nothing was the same, and that's when Grandma did something I'd never seen her do in public. I was still half hidden by the archway when Grandma did it. She set down her wine glass, folded her hands neatly on the table, and for the first time all evening raised her voice just enough to slice through the chatter. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even sharp, but it was the kind of tone that made everyone's heads lift, like a school bell ringing out of nowhere. "Valora, darling," she said, her words measured, "you made such a lovely soup. Why haven't you had any yourself?" The room went quiet in a single collective exhale. Even Celine, who'd been scrolling through her phone under the table, froze mid-swipe. Forks hovered in the air. A cousin's laugh died halfway out of his mouth. My mother blinked at Grandma, her perfect lipstick curling into a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, I tasted it earlier," she replied, her voice bright but airy, like someone who'd rehearsed the line. "I'm full. You know me, I never eat much at parties." Grandma tilted her head slightly, the way she does when she's testing someone. "One bite now," she said gently. "Just to show Anara it's fine. Humor me." I could see my mother's fingers tremble as she set her wine glass down. It wasn't dramatic, just a brief, almost imperceptible tremor. She gave a small laugh, the same one she used at charity events when someone asked her a question she didn't like. "There's no need to perform," she said. Anara knows I wouldn't serve anything bad. But the silence around her deepened. I could feel the shift in the air. Guests started exchanging glances. A cousin nudged another and whispered, not as quietly as he thought, "Why wouldn't she eat it?" I watched the flicker in my mother's eyes, quick, like the flash of a match before it goes out. She looked at the bowl, then back up, her smile tightening just enough for me to see the crack. Grandma didn't blink. Instead, she reached out for the serving spoon herself. Her rings glinted under the chandelier as she stirred the soup slowly, the motion deliberate, like she was conducting an orchestra. "It smells different," she said lightly, almost as if she were commenting on the weather. "Earthy, very specific." The room held its breath. Celine shifted in her seat, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. The clinking and scraping that had filled the air moments before had stopped entirely. Even the soft jazz playing from the Bluetooth speaker seemed too far away to matter. Valora's smile began to fade. "It's wild mushrooms," she said finally. "A new recipe. You're making everyone nervous for nothing." Grandma's hand paused, spoon still in the bowl. "Am I?" she asked, voice mild. My heart hammered. From where I stood in the hallway, I could see my mother's posture stiffen, her shoulders drawing back like a cat ready to swipe. She reached for her glass again, but her fingers hesitated on the stem. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. For years, Grandma had been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the woman who slipped notes under tables instead of making scenes. But tonight, she wasn't just asking questions. She was laying a trap. I remembered every time my mother had told me, "Don't embarrass the family," while she erased me from the photo, from the story, from the card. Tonight, it wasn't me who risked embarrassment. It was her. Grandma set the spoon back down with a soft clink, then looked around the table, her eyes resting on each guest one by one. "Well," she said, lifting her wine with a small, measured smile, "cheers to a dinner we'll always remember." There was a flutter of nervous laughter from the guests. A few raised their glasses. Celine forced a chuckle, too loud, like a TV laugh track, but no one reached for the soup again. The bowl sat in the center of the table, untouched, a centerpiece no one wanted to claim. I stayed in the hallway, my breath shallow. My mother's gaze shifted suddenly toward the archway, not casually, directly, as if she could feel me there. Our eyes met for a heartbeat. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of challenge and something like warning. It was the same look she gave me when I was a kid, and she caught me sneaking out of the kitchen late at night. "Don't you dare!" But I didn't look away. Not this time. The tension stretched like a wire. Grandma took another sip of wine. My mother sat back, smile frozen. Someone coughed, too softly to break the spell. And then, just as I started to retreat into the shadows again, my phone buzzed in my purse. The sound cut through the silence like a pin dropping onto glass. Every head turned, but only my mother's eyes narrowed. My fingers closed around the phone automatically, my thumb brushing the edge of the screen before I even thought about it. It vibrated again, persistent, like whoever was on the other end knew this was the moment to reach me. I glanced at the screen. No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. But the preview of the message made my stomach twist. "Get out now. Don't drink anything." I looked up slowly. Grandma's gaze was still on me, but she hadn't moved. Her face gave nothing away. My mother tilted her head, almost imperceptibly, still watching me from across the room. The phone buzzed again. The phone kept buzzing against my palm like a live thing. I glanced at the screen again while I was still standing in the hallway, half hidden by the archway. It wasn't the same unknown number as before. This time, it was a name I knew very well. My therapist, Dr. Lundy. The preview line made my stomach tighten. "Hi, Anara. Confirming your session Monday at 3 p.m. We can discuss the..." And then it cut off. Just a routine message, just logistics. But seeing it there, in that moment, felt like a light shining on the one private place I'd been able to keep untouched. I pressed the phone to my thigh, trying to block the glow of the screen as I re-entered the room. The laughter and low hum of conversation washed over me like nothing had changed, but I could feel eyes on me the way a person feels heat from a lamp. I crossed to the buffet, poured myself a glass of water, and in that second, my phone slipped slightly out of my grasp, the screen flashing in the light. My mother's gaze snapped to it. Not curious, not casual. Quick, calculating. I saw her eyes flicker as the notification blinked again. She didn't say anything right away, just smiled, a little too bright, and went back to her wine. But I'd been her daughter long enough to know when she was filing information away to use later. I took a sip of water, pretending not to notice. My hands were steady now. My heartbeat, though, wasn't. Grandma's eyes were still on me from across the table. She gave the faintest shake of her head, like she was telling me to stay quiet. But the room was already shifting again, tilting in that way it always did before my mother took control of a narrative. I put my phone in my purse and began walking back toward my seat. I didn't even get there before she began. "It's been a tough year for Anara, hasn't it?" Valora's voice floated out sweet and rich, like honey over a knife. She was looking at no one in particular but projecting to the whole table. She's seeing someone now. For her emotions, I mean. The fork in Grandma's hand slipped against her plate with a sharp clink. No one else moved. A cousin coughed lightly. Celine's head lifted from her phone, her mouth curling into something between a smirk and sympathy. "That explains the drama," Celine said softly, but not softly enough. Her eyes didn't leave her screen. The words slid through me like cold water. My therapy, my one quiet space, turned into a punchline in front of a dozen people. I felt the air in the room shift again, some guests looking at their glasses, others pretending to be fascinated by the centerpiece. This was how Valora did it. She never shouted. She just unwrapped you in public and called it love. I stood still for a moment behind my chair. My hands were on the backrest. I could have left again. I could have gone back to the bathroom, let the tears fall where no one would see. That's what they expected. But I didn't move. Instead, I slid into my seat slowly, deliberately, and placed my water glass in front of me. My fingers didn't shake. My voice, when it came, was low but steady. "You know what's funny?" I said, smiling a little like we were all in on a joke. "For someone who's been to therapy, at least I face my truths." The table went still. Valora's smile flickered. I turned to her, my voice soft but unflinching. "Some of us have therapists. Some of us should have had them decades ago." No one breathed. Celine's phone screen went dark as she set it down without realizing. A cousin stared at his plate. Aunt Isolde's lips parted like she might say something, then closed again. Grandma's eyes softened, just slightly, but she didn't speak. Valora let out a small laugh that sounded like glass cracking. "Anara, sweetheart, don't be cruel. We're all family here." I tilted my head, matching her tone. "Exactly, family. So why not tell the truth?" A flush rose on her cheeks. Faint, but there. She picked up her wine glass, then set it down again without drinking. Her nails clicked against the stem. She looked at me, not at the soup, not at anyone else. At me. For the first time all night, I didn't look away. The silence stretched, heavier than before. I could feel the pulse in my throat, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something closer to clarity. I stood up, smooth and unhurried. "Excuse me," I said, my voice still calm. "I think it's time we all stopped pretending." Without waiting for permission, I reached across the table, grabbed the heavy soup bowl by its handles, and lifted it. It was still warm, the smell rising up at me like the earth after rain. I held it steady, turning without spilling, and walked toward the kitchen. No one spoke. The only sound was my heels against the hardwood floor. I set the bowl on the kitchen island and let my hands rest on the cool marble for a moment. The kitchen was dimmer than the dining room, the only light coming from under cabinet bulbs. I could hear faint murmurs behind me, my name, whispered like a question, like a warning. I looked down at the soup. Dark, rich, flecks of green and brown. It smelled almost pleasant, almost. I wrapped my fingers around the ladle. My heartbeat was steady now. This was not a tantrum. This was a decision. If no one else will test it, I said, loud enough for my voice to carry back into the dining room. I will. I dipped the ladle, lifted it to eye level. The liquid shimmered under the light. My reflection wavered on its surface, fractured but still there. I brought it closer to my mouth, and a hand caught my wrist, firm, not rough, surprising enough to make me drop the ladle back into the bowl with a splash. I turned sharply, but I didn't expect someone else to stop me first. Grandma's fingers were cool but steady as they closed over mine, stopping the ladle before it reached my lips. The kitchen lights glinted off her rings, and for a moment all I could see was her hand in mine, the soup still steaming between us. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her eyes held mine, calm but firm. "Not like this," she said softly, just loud enough for me to hear. The murmur of conversation from the dining room swelled and rolled back like a tide. Someone laughed at something, a burst of sound too bright, too brittle. Then Ramona's voice floated in, loud and clear, like a match struck in a quiet room. "Wait, isn't this Celine's birthday?" I froze. The words hung in the air like smoke. Grandma's eyes flicked toward the doorway, but she didn't let go of my hand. Behind us, the laughter sharpened into a ripple of whispers. Chairs scraped. A few people chuckled nervously. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a reveal. So it wasn't even my night. Not really. My hands felt suddenly cold against the warmth of the soup bowl. I released the ladle slowly, letting it slip back into the liquid with a muted plop. The kitchen smelled of mushrooms and garlic and something else, something I couldn't name. Grandma eased the bowl back onto the counter. She straightened but stayed close, her hand still brushing my wrist like she was anchoring me. From the dining room came Valora's voice, smooth and steady, as if nothing unusual had been said. "Ramona, don't be silly. Of course it's Anara's birthday." Ramona laughed again. "Well, forgive me, Valora. The decorations just look so much like Celine's style. I thought maybe we were, you know." Her voice trailed off. Celine's laugh cut through, light and sweet. "That's okay, Ramona. People mix things up all the time." Grandma's mouth tightened, just slightly. She gave my wrist a small squeeze before letting go. "Stay calm," she whispered. "Watch." I straightened, smoothing the front of my dress with hands that still trembled. "Watch what?" I whispered back. But Grandma didn't answer. She stepped back toward the archway, leaving me in the kitchen with the soup, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wiped my palms on a dish towel, steadied my breath, and followed her out. The dining room felt brighter now, the chandelier casting long shadows across the polished table. Everyone was gathered around the television. Valora had wheeled in on a cart from the den. The screen flickered with the opening frames of a video montage. Laughter and applause trickled up from the guests as upbeat music began to play. I hung back, leaning against the doorway. On the screen, Celine, in shot after shot. Celine at the beach. Celine at college. Celine blowing out candles at some party. Celine opening presents, holding babies, posing with cousins. The montage was cut like a commercial, a highlight reel of one person's life wrapped in the illusion of family. Not one frame of me. I felt my jaw tighten. I remembered holding the camera for some of those clips, behind the lens at the family reunion, filming Celine's engagement announcement, capturing her graduation while everyone clapped. My voice had been there behind the camera, my hands had steadied it, but in this montage, I didn't exist. Valora's voice rose above the music, warm and proud. "Our family's brightest light." She said it like a benediction, her smile wide as she watched her eldest daughter beam from the screen. Someone clapped. A few murmured, "So beautiful," under their breath. Grandma did not clap. Her eyes stayed on me, even as everyone else looked at the screen. I didn't move. My face stayed neutral, but my nails dug crescents into my palms. Years of invisibility coalesced into a single moment. I remembered being a child, pressed into service as the one who fetched, who filmed, who stood aside so the real picture could be taken. I had told myself it didn't matter, that one day it would change. It hadn't. The montage ended with Celine smiling at the camera, wind blowing her hair back like a model in a commercial. The screen went black, the room filled with soft applause, a few whistles. Then silence. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. Not even Celine. Valora poured herself another glass of wine, the liquid sloshing a little as it filled the crystal. I exhaled, slow and steady, then pushed my chair back. The sound of the legs scraping the hardwood made several heads snap up. I stood, smoothed my dress again, and walked to the center of the room. Each step felt deliberate, heavy. When I spoke, my voice was calm. Would anyone like to know what's actually in that soup? All eyes swung to me. The air went still. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen felt louder. Valora's wine glass froze halfway to her mouth. Celine shifted uncomfortably, looking between me and Mom like she'd just realized she was sitting in the splash zone. Ramona's smile faltered. A cousin whispered something I couldn't hear. I let the silence stretch just long enough. My heartbeat was steady now. The weight of the evening had shifted again, and for once, it was in my hands. "And then," I said softly, my eyes on my mother, "maybe we can talk about what this dinner is really about." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words hung there, heavy and sharp, slicing through the polite pretense like glass underfoot. Grandma moved then. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on mine, something clenched in her hand that caught the chandelier's light as she came to stand beside me. Grandma's steps were slow but purposeful as she crossed the dining room, every heel click echoing louder than the soft murmurs circling the table. Her right hand clutched an envelope, its edges crumpled where her fingers had dug in. I could see her breathing through her nose, steady but deep, like she'd been preparing for this moment all evening. "This," she said, placing the envelope flat on the table in front of my mother, "should have been brought out a long time ago." The words were soft, but they hit the air like a crack. Forks froze mid-air, glasses halfway lifted. Celine's face went blank. Even Ramona, who always had some bright comment to fill a pause, stayed silent. I shifted my weight and stepped closer to the archway. My hands were cold. My pulse beat against my palms. Grandma opened the envelope, pulling out a thick, folded stack of papers and laying them down for all to see. The paper had the yellowed edges of something pulled from a drawer after years of hiding. "Medical records," Grandma announced. "From 25 years ago, Valora was treated after an incident with mushrooms." Valora's face didn't move at first. Her wine glass trembled only slightly as she set it down. The sound of the glass touching the table seemed to echo in the silence. Grandma went on. "She was hospitalized. Paranoia, mood swings, an episode after she accused my cooking of making her sick. Tests proved otherwise. It wasn't my food then either, but we found out she'd foraged something on her own." My breath caught. No one else spoke. The guests looked at each other, faces pale, waiting for someone to break the silence. "I wanted to protect her," Grandma said, "but protection can't last forever." Valora laughed, a high, brittle sound that cracked halfway out. "That's ancient history, Mother," she said. "You have no right." "History repeats," Grandma interrupted gently. Valora's mouth snapped shut. I took a small step forward into the dining room. The bowl of soup still sat in the center of the table, its sheen dulled under the light, untouched. My voice, when it came, was low but steady. It wasn't just history. Everyone turned, even Celine. "I had the soup tested," I said. "A friend of Grandma's took a sample into town earlier this evening." A murmur of disbelief rippled across the room. "It came back with trace toxins," I said clearly. "Not enough to kill, but enough to make someone very sick." Celine's chair squealed as she scooted back from the table, her hand covering her mouth. Ramona whispered something I couldn't catch. A cousin shook his head, muttering, "This is insane," under his breath, but my mother didn't move. Her fingers clenched white around the edge of her napkin. Her eyes were on me but unfocused, like she was staring past me at some distant point only she could see. She began, her voice thin. "I just wanted her to stop looking at me like I failed." The words dropped like stones into water. Grandma didn't respond with rage. She didn't raise her voice. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her hands folded like a prayer. "You did fail, Valora," she whispered, "but I didn't want you to become what you feared." Valora's face crumpled. She gave a short, harsh sob and collapsed back into her chair, her shoulders shaking. No one reached out to comfort her. Not Celine, not Ramona. The guests sat frozen, eyes darting between me, Grandma, and my mother like they'd stumbled into a play they hadn't bought tickets for. I straightened, my hands steady at my sides. My voice was calm, measured, but it carried through the room. This was never about drama, it was survival. Some people weaponize food, some weaponize silence. My mother mastered both. No one argued. No one said, "That's not true," or "She'd never do that." The weight of the truth pressed down on the table like a third centerpiece. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen and my mother's ragged breathing. Slowly, chairs scraped back. Guests began standing, one by one. A cousin whispered, "I should go." Ramona murmured something about the drive back to Denver. Celine stayed seated for a long moment, then stood without a word, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. No one touched the soup. No police were called. No shouting. No handcuffs. Just the quiet, deliberate dismantling of a facade. People left the house in silence, coats pulled tight, faces pale. The front door opened and shut, each sound hollow against the high ceilings. When the room was finally empty except for Grandma, my mother, and me, the silence felt like a weight pressing on my chest. Valora stayed slumped in her chair, staring at the table without seeing it. Grandma came to my side. She didn't take my hand. She didn't have to. Her voice was soft as she spoke. "You didn't fight her. You ended her." I nodded, but it didn't feel like victory. We walked together to the front door. The night air was cool against my face, the sound of the wind through the trees sharp and clean after the heavy air of the dining room. Grandma paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder once before pulling the door shut behind us. "But endings rarely feel clean," she murmured, "even when the battle is over." The next morning, the house was unnaturally still. No clinking of coffee cups, no soft thud of the newspaper hitting the porch, no smell of bacon drifting from the kitchen. Just silence. Heavy, untouched. The kind of silence that follows a storm when even the wind seems unsure if it's safe to move again. I padded barefoot into the dining room. My heels had blistered the night before, but I didn't mind the ache. It felt like a small tax for having survived something unspoken. The room looked almost exactly as it had when I left it. Half-drunk glasses, crumpled napkins, a bouquet of pink roses that had started to lean, one stem snapped and drooping like it couldn't hold the weight anymore. The soup bowl was gone. I didn't ask where it went. On the counter near the gift table, still cluttered with unopened packages, gift bags, a stack of cards no one had touched. I saw it. My letter. The one I wrote 3 weeks ago when I wasn't sure if I'd be able to sit through that dinner. I'd tucked it behind the fruit bowl, out of sight, in case I needed to leave without explanation. I picked it up now, unfolded it slowly. The paper had curled slightly at the edges, as if absorbing the tension in the air like moisture. I sat at the edge of the dining room table and began to read it aloud in my head, as if the words belonged to someone else. "Dear Mom, I'm not leaving because I hate you. I'm leaving because I refuse to become you. I refuse to carry silence the way you wore it, like armor, like a weapon. I've learned that love without safety isn't love at all. It's survival dressed up to look like tradition. I'm done surviving. I want to live, even if it means doing it far away from here." There was more. Some scribbled lines, some scratched-out phrases. But that paragraph had always been the spine of it. I read it again, and again. And then I folded it carefully, more neatly than before, and slid it into the drawer near the back of the kitchen, behind the napkin rings and old coupons no one ever used. I didn't need to leave it anymore, but I didn't want to take it with me either. Later that morning, I stepped out onto the patio. The sun was barely up, and a thin mist hung over the yard like the house itself was still trying to breathe again. Valora was already there. She was wrapped in an old shawl, the one she wore every Thanksgiving, always with a comment about how it had belonged to her mother. Her hands were curled around a mug of coffee, her gaze fixed somewhere off in the trees behind the fence. She didn't turn when I sat down next to her. The silence stretched, but not uncomfortably. It was a different kind of quiet, not charged, not tactical. Just tired. I didn't know it would go that far, she said finally. Her voice was hoarse, not broken, not dramatic, just used up. I didn't rush to fill the space, let the words land. You never had to go that far, I said. You just had to stop. She didn't nod, didn't apologize, but she also didn't argue. We sat there for a long while, watching the mist fade. Two women who shared blood and history and a deep, echoing pain. No hugs, no cleansing tears, just acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's the most honest version of healing. By noon, I had packed, not because I was running, not this time, but because it was time to go. My suitcase stood by the door, zipped and waiting. I took one last look around the house. The hallway where I once ran barefoot as a child, the kitchen where I learned how to boil water, the living room where my father's laughter used to echo before it was replaced by curated silence. Grandma waited by the front steps. She handed me a small folded piece of paper, her fingers brushing mine with deliberate care. You wrote me a note once, she said. Figured I owed you one back. I tucked it into my coat pocket without reading it yet. Not everything has to be opened immediately. She gave me a firm, lingering hug, the kind that says I believe in you even if it never uses those words. Then she stepped back, her hands still resting lightly on my shoulders. Freedom looks good on you, she whispered. Keep wearing it. I smiled. Not a wide smile, not a grateful, glowing, movie-ending grin, just a quiet, earned one. I walked to the car, opened the door, slid in, and started the engine. The house stayed in the rearview mirror as I pulled out of the driveway. But this time, I didn't look back. Some families bury the truth, but mine tried to serve it in a bowl. Some stories don't end with justice in a courtroom or apologies whispered across a dinner table. Sometimes, the most powerful justice is walking away with your dignity intact, knowing you saw the truth, faced it, and didn't flinch. Have you ever been in a family where silence was used as a weapon, where love came with a condition, or worse, a price? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next powerful true life story. There's more to come.